Thanks so much for joining this Rochester Beacon session. I'm Karen Hyder, your host, turning it over now to Smriti Jacob.
Welcome everyone to our conversation with Malik Evans. I'm Smriti Jacob, Managing Editor of the Rochester Beacon. Thank you all for being here. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to recognize our sponsors for this event. Bond, Shenick & King, LLP, our gold sponsor, strongly supports Malik Evans' vision for the city of Rochester. Bond is deeply committed to addressing the homeless issues in Rochester and joins the next mayor and many in the private sector in compassionately serving the most vulnerable in our community. To find out what more you can do, please contact Ed Hurahan at Bond to join in these efforts. Our silver sponsor is Canandaigua National Bank and Trust Company, which has been serving the Rochester region for more than a century. Next week, we will mark the Beacon's 3rd anniversary. Our sponsor's generous support has helped make possible not just this event, but the work we do every day. In June, Malik Evans won 2/3 of the vote in his decisive victory over incumbent Mayor Lovely Warren in the Democratic mayoral primary. With no opponent on the ballot in November, the way is clear for him to become Rochester's next mayor in January. How will he lead Rochester? How will he tackle the many challenges facing the city? We will discuss these questions and more. Welcome, Malik. Thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule to be with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on the upcoming 3rd anniversary.
Thank you. Well, let's just get right to it. When you spoke to supporters after you won the primary, you said, "Tonight is the true beginning of our journey together to put Rochester in the upper echelon of US cities where it belongs." What is the biggest hurdle or challenge the city faces in the journey ahead?
Well, I always tell people when you talk about the challenges that we face, we can't look at them in isolation. So it's always not just one thing, but really two things that are really tied together. And I tell people all the time that economic empowerment, and public safety are tied at the hip. They go together. So we have to ensure that we build a public safety system that on one end have our residents feeling safe, secure, and they feel as though Rochester is a place where they want to go. But on the other end, we also have to ensure that we have economic development opportunities for every single part of our community, regardless of where you live or your zip code, because I believe that when people are working, when they're contributing to the community, they're more likely to not get involved in crime or negative behavior. So those two things are absolutely tied together. We have to make sure that we have trust between the community and our police department. And then we also have to make sure that people, when they look at Rochester, they see it as a place that they want to invest in. So those two issues are absolutely critical to ensuring the success of Rochester.
And just to go off of the trust, I mean, you've talked about how trust and transparency are going to be guiding principles and should be guiding principles to sort of restore trust between City Hall and the community. You noticed when you ran for mayor, that decision came after the Daniel Prude case became public. What specific steps would you take to restore that trust, to build that trust and transparency that you've talked about?
One of the most important things is that we have to make sure that we are out and connected to the community, and that all information is given in a timely manner, be it something as more archaic that you would understand as a journalist as FOIA requests, right? Ensuring that that process is streamlined and that information is put out on a regular basis, but then just the things that matter the most, which is information that the public wants. So be it information from the police department as it relates to incidents or things that might happen in the community, but also being honest about the challenges that we face. One of the things that you won't have to worry about me doing is trying to sugarcoat the challenges that we have in Rochester. So I have no problems talking about the high levels of homicide that we see this year, because in order to solve those issues, we have to put it out there and talk about it. But also embedding folks that are in City Hall within our community, so they are connecting with the people to help build that trust. Trust is something that is not that you just get easily. It's something that has to be earned. In order to earn that, you have to have a connection with the citizens and the people that are out there. And I think, for example, when we talk about public safety, that's reinvigorating police and citizens coming together to help solve a lot of the challenges that we have. Often when there's a homicide or a crime, if people don't trust the police, they don't participate in helping to solve that crime, or if they feel unsafe themselves, they won't participate in doing that. So the way to knock down those barriers is really to ensure that we form this strong, cohesive, and connection with the community. The other piece that I talk a lot about is neighborhoods. We have to empower neighborhoods. And I always tell the story of, I'm a big fan of Westerns. And Clint Eastwood has an old Western, it's called High Falls Drifter. I'm sure my staff is tired of me telling the story. But in that Western, Clint Eastwood comes to the town to empower the people to help them be able to solve their own problems. And in the Western, it's always a bad guy or some ruffian that's coming into the town to, rob the place, shoot him up, take all the people out. But he empowers all those people to be able to have the ability to defend themselves and take care of that town. And then just before the bad guys come, he looks at them and he says, "Okay, I'm out of here." And they look at him and say, "Wait a minute, where are you going?" And he says, and basically that message is, he's equipped them. They have all the knowledge. They have all the skills to be able to move forward. So in order for us to take Rochester to the next level, we have to make sure that our citizens are empowered. And that also will help build trust in our neighborhoods. So how do we ensure that our neighborhoods are empowered, that our young professionals are empowered, that our senior citizens are empowered, that our business community feels empowered? And once you have all those different puzzle pieces empowered, then you'll start to see trust increase. And more importantly, you'll start to see that transformation that I talk about in Rochester. So, and that's what I see the job as merits, is I can't do these things alone. And no one person is going to be able to solve the myriad of challenges that we have in our community. But by collectively making sure that our folks are empowered to make a difference in their respective places or stations, the sky will be the limit. And that's what I meant by when I say go to the upper echelon of US cities. If you look at some of our peer cities, they're great places. But I believe that Rochester is just as good as some of those cities, but even better. And by working together, we'll be able to do that. I honestly believe it.
If I were to sort of look at those puzzle pieces separately a little bit, if you could humor me with that, how can we, let's take public safety. How do we build or close the divide between the Rochester Police Department and some members of the Rochester community? How do we, bring that trust back? It's a pretty large divide at this point. Would you say that? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it is a large divide. I think there is absolutely a large divide, but one that we have to bridge in order for our city to be safe. Because if you look at some of the homicides that we've had over the years, there have been witnesses that have been at those homicides that have not come forward, that have not spoken about it. So we have to work to build that trust. And I think one of the things that you have to do is making sure that police officers are in those neighborhoods, out of the cars, interacting with people in spaces that are not involving issues of crime or a negative situation. That exposure needs to happen prior to challenges that happen. And that means having honest dialogue about what it is that we need to do. It means bringing these conversations not at City Hall or at the public safety building, but in community centers, in rec centers, in churches, in stores, on street corners, which I love. At City Council, I did something called Councilman on the Corner, where we were outside in neighborhoods and had conversations. And we did a lot of this during the campaign. So that's how you start to tear down a lot of these walls and then start to have some of those dialogues. And then understanding that people are going to be at different places depending on what their backgrounds are or where they come from, and saying that it's okay for to have these crucial conversations and dialogue on a regular occurrence, and it just can't be one time when there's a tragedy. But then we also have to be transparent by making sure that we implement things that get people's trust. Releasing body-worn camera footage on time in a timely manner, making sure that we report on crimes and making sure that there are outlets for people who want to be able to report crimes or have challenges with things in their neighborhood. So when we start to do these things, you start to see the change. And then more importantly, reporting out on the things that you're hearing. You know, constituents want to hear that there are opportunities for them to have been heard. And I think it goes vice versa. So I think all of those things are important. The other thing that's critical is you know, one of the most important tasks that any mayor has is selecting a police chief. So how do you select a police chief that not only has the respect of men and women in uniform, but also can connect with the community? Because that person is really, even more so than the mayor, responsible for setting the tone within the department and working to build those connections within the community. So all of those things, I think, go together, and I keep talking about these puzzle pieces that I think will go a long way to building that trust in the community.
You actually jumped ahead to my next question, which was the fact that you get to appoint a new, you will have the opportunity to appoint a new police chief. What priorities would you assign to that role? You talked about qualities of respect and understanding. What priorities would you assign to that position?
I think that someone that understands that we are in the 21st century model of policing, where it is now more than ever to be able, now more than ever, it is important that we build strong connections with our community. That is absolutely critical to me. That they can command and have the respect of the men and women in uniform. You have to have that respect, and that you are an excellent communicator, because as a chief, you are not only just accountable to the mayor in the city of Rochester and city council and police officers and the broader community. So how are you able to navigate that? Can you navigate that in a way that engenders respect and trust are absolutely critical. Those are critical elements. It's a tall word, but those are critical elements that I'll be looking for in the next police chief, because it's not a tough job. I always tell people, look, there are 3 jobs that I think are extremely difficult: police chief, and not in any particular order: police chief, mayor, and school superintendent, particularly the Rochester City School. Those are 3 very difficult jobs. And, you know, and the difference is the mayor, you're elected, right? The people get to elect you. But when you're the police chief, you're accountable to a lot of people, and you got to answer to a lot of people, and you have to be able to navigate that. And being able to navigate that, I think, will ensure the success of that person.
And you touched upon this when you're talking about public safety, the fact that gun violence is plaguing Rochester. We've already had as many shooting victims and fatalities in 2021, as many as we had in 2020, and that was a deadly year for us. As mayor, can you effectively combat gun violence? You know, what actions can we take, or can your administration take to help with that?
Well, let me be clear. There won't be any magic wands in my briefcase to wave, and then all of a sudden gun violence will go away. One of the things that we have to do, you know, and I look at this as a multi-pronged approach. Long term, we have to make sure that individuals have access to opportunity so they won't want to pick up a gun. We know that if a person is not working, we know that if a person has idle time on their hands, they're more likely to get involved in violence. In many of these instances, there are very young people that are involved in violence. If you look at the number of shooting victims that are under the age of 25, that should be alarming. If you look at some of the individuals that have been involved in some of the most horrific violence incidences that we have seen this year, they have been young people. For example, the gentleman that was set on fire and died, those were 14 and 15-year-olds. If you look at some of the victims of violence, they've been very young. So long term, we have to make sure that we take this from a multi-pronged approach. Ensuring opportunity. This is why I'm big on pushing my youth to work program for young people, because we want our young people to be so busy and so tired that they won't have time to think about picking up a gun, because they are working, providing for themselves and for their family, and getting the skills that they need in order to survive, to not just survive, but thrive in their community. So there's that end. But then on the more triage end, when you want to stop the bleeding, we have to make sure that we have, that we get people who are known to have a proclivity to violence, that we get in front of them before they're more likely to start that violence, to say, we know who you are, we know what you're doing, and we want to give you two opportunities. Either the opportunity will be for you to be going away for a while, or we can get you involved in something positive to turn you another direction. We know that illegal guns are a major problem in our community. So working with our federal and state and local partners to stop the flow of illegal guns that are in our community is also a longer term solution. But I'm more of a preventative person instead of an intervention person. And we need to look at what we can do to prevent people wanting to get into violence. So it's peer mediation. It's making sure that we get our young people early. And then one of the most important things is that our community has to stand up and say enough is enough. See, this cannot be done. And I use my other analogy of the town, of the community, my Clint Eastwood example of the neighbors coming together, of those townsfolk coming together to say, hey, this is our community, this is what we're going to do. So when there's a shooting in a Walmart parking lot and almost 100 people are present, and someone says, oh, we didn't see anything, how do we change that mindset so people can be willing to say, no, this is what happened, and we can get those individuals off the streets that are perpetuating this unacceptable violence that is in our community. And that may mean getting witnesses out of town, giving witnesses incentives and opportunities so that way they feel safe and want to come forward. So it is really a multi-pronged approach. And I always tell people that I drive folks crazy because I say it's not just one thing that's going to solve this. But those things taken together, I think, will allow us to see a decrease in gun violence. And more importantly, I think it will make our community a lot safer.
During your campaign, you talked about a gun czar, you know, the idea that we could declare a gun emergency. Do you think those actions could make a difference, or is that still something you're thinking about?
It is something I'm thinking about. A lot of people don't like the term czar, so I don't know what word I would use, but we definitely need to put a explanation point on this issue. We need to. It is absolutely a state of emergency. Just violence in general. And guns are one piece of it, but, you know, we had someone murdered with a hatchet. There have been stabbings. So violence in general and what's happening there and how we can get to the root causes to really start to change the trajectory of some of the violence that we've seen in our community. Violence matters because people need to feel safe and secure. And a person should never have to move out of a neighborhood because they feel as though violence is happening there. They should move out of their neighborhood because they may want a bigger house, they want a different color, they want a 2-car garage, or they just want to live on a different side of town. No one in our community should say, I'm moving because I feel unsafe in my neighborhood. And that is something that is the question that we will be asking almost every day. When we look at our population trends and we look at people coming into the city, why is it that they feel as though, what is it that makes them feel safe, number one? And more importantly, what is it that we can do to keep them there? And a safe environment is something that everyone deserves. And we need to ensure that we zero in on violence. So that may mean having one individual that is absolutely zeroed in and keyed in on that. But I think that what has happened over the last couple of years in our country, not just in our community, is that we've become numb to it. And this was just brought home to me a couple of months ago when a 16-year-old was killed by a stray bullet, where there were 2 individuals arguing about a dirt bike, and the 16-year-old was hit and died. And there was very little outcry. There were no marches, there were no screams, there were no, and it broke my heart. And to this day, I can't get him out of my mind because this was an innocent victim who was hit by gunfire. But the media and everyone just kind of went on like it was just another day at the office, another day in the community. And we can't ever become so numb to a person losing their life that it just becomes another day in the neighborhood. That can't happen. And it's going to take everything we can to keep highlighting that. It's not fun to talk about, but we have to talk about it because that's how we can start to heal and change it.
I'm going to pick another of your puzzle pieces, which is the economy and jobs. That remains the number one issue for Rochesterians. What are some of the things you can do as mayor to spur job creation? You talked about youth to work. What else can we do? Would you pursue larger businesses like Constellation coming to downtown, or would you focus on, you know, fostering a climate for smaller businesses to grow in the city?
Yeah, great question. It's a multi-pronged approach. Now, first off, we know that small business is absolutely critical. If 1 in 3 small businesses in America creates at least one job, America could be at full employment. That shows you the power that these small businesses have, because they then become larger businesses. And we know that when I say small businesses, we know that a lot of the large businesses started out as small businesses. So that's absolutely critical. I think that we have to create the business ecosystem to make sure that that happens. So as a mayor, while you won't be out creating the jobs, you can create the climate. And what you can do to try to help to create that climate is to do 3 things: making sure that businesses have access to capital, which is something that is critical for any business to sustain; making sure that we have a strong business ecosystem within Rochester; and thirdly, making sure, and probably most importantly, that we encourage access to acumen. Because we know that if we give someone $10,000 to start a business, but they've never been in business in their entire life, they're more likely to fail. But if they get $10,000 and they pair it with a mentor or an advisor that can help them take their business to the next level, they're more likely to be successful. We also know that we can't wait on large businesses to come and save us. We have to do both. Rochester is still sometimes caught up in Kodak, Xerox, and Bausch and Lomb. While those were important factors in our community, they are not large. They're not as large as they were. And as I said recently in a New York Times article a couple of weeks ago, we are now a company. We are a town of businesses. We are a town of companies. We are no longer a company town. So that means that we have to make sure that we increase the number of small businesses that we have, because they will be the ones that will create the larger businesses. So how do we create businesses, the next Datto or the next Cloud Checker, businesses that came up that are now growing and continue to grow in our community, while at the same time tackling and trying to say anchor institutions like a Constellations come to Rochester, because from that, we will also have a great multiplier effect. We know also that in order to create wealth, there are 2 things that create wealth in America: home ownership and small business. And we know that if we can create more of those, more small businesses, and increase the home ownership rate, which is around 29% in the city of Rochester, we will see an overall economic uplift. So when we talk about economics and economic empowerment, we look at it not just from a jobs or from or a business type thing. We look at it as a whole suite of things that we call our economic empowerment agenda. And it involves all those things: big businesses, small businesses, home ownership, access to capital. And then we cannot forget about the coordination and partnerships that we must have with our trades: International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, pipe fitters, sheet metal workers. How are we also making sure that we have enough people that are able to fill those slots to also be able to take jobs to the next level, either to be able to work for companies or start those types of businesses on their own? So it really is a multi-pronged approach that is going to take in order for us to really make sure that we decrease unemployment and provide jobs for people that pay a living wage and rebuilds the middle class. That's what's going to transform Rochester and bring down our poverty rate.
If I can, let's stick with home ownership for a little bit. I know this is important to you. Why do you see this as an important way to build the middle class, if I were to say that? And how would you sort of try to boost that home ownership rate, which is low in the city?
Yeah, home ownership to me is like college. When I went to college, and my father said, and I told my dad, I said, "Dad, I don't know if I want to go to college or not." He said to me, he said, "Okay, that's nice. When you go, you can tell me if it was for you or not." But so I had that opportunity, right? And home ownership is that same way. Not everyone should own a home or may not want to own a home, but they should have that opportunity, because we know that home ownership automatically increases your net worth. So for example, if your grandmother owned a home and she then passed that home down to your mother, and then your mother then passed that home on to you, you are generationally transformed, because you now have an asset that has appreciated in value that you now have, that you can leverage to pay for college, to take equity out to start a business, or to sell it at a increase where you then have made money off of it. So that's why home ownership is so important. It's important, but we also know that if someone has a stable home and has a stable environment in which to live, they're more likely to graduate from high school. They're more likely to have better employment, and they're more likely to be able to participate in their neighborhood and bring stability to their neighborhood. So that is why home ownership is absolutely critical. In terms of barriers, we know that some of the biggest barriers to home ownership is down payment assistance, where you have to come up with a portion for the down payment. So how can we work with, as a city, organizations, be it financial institutions and also businesses, to incentivize home ownership through matching grants, through savings, which is also important. We know that like half of Americans can't come up with $400 for an emergency. So how can we also make sure that we create an environment where a person can save over time to be able to then have access to be able to buy that home? How can we also present and allow opportunities for our residents to have rent to own, lease to own programs where they also can have the ability to be in a stable home and then know at the opportunity that they can then get that home? How can we make sure that we are building more single family homes where people have the opportunity to own? So it is absolutely critical. I think it's important because it transforms and it automatically can help increase the middle class because it's providing an asset that appreciates in value to people who may not have had access to that asset before.
And then there are the countless families that are living in poverty in the city, which has the highest level of childhood, among the highest rates of childhood poverty in the nation. What can an Evans administration do that hasn't been done before? We have tried to solve this problem or could try to mitigate the problem. What can we do that hasn't been done before?
Well, I think well, the book of Ecclesiastes says that there's nothing new under the sun. So I think some of everything has been tried. But I think that some of the things that we have to do that has never been done before is that we have to have better coordination. And we always say that we're going to have that we're going to have coordination, and we don't. So for us, it is exactly one of the most important things that I will do is our relationship that we're going to have with the county. For example, the county runs human services. A lot of the people who are in poverty access human services, the Department of Social Services, which is a part of the county, as well as the health department. So how do we make sure that those puzzle pieces fit together, that the county and city are aligned as government entities to attack poverty? How do we ensure that if a young person is born into poverty, that is just a momentary stop of where they are and not the destination of where they will be for the rest of their life? And that means making sure that we are providing jobs for people that match their skill set and that we don't pull the safety net up from people while they are trying to move up for poverty. So for example, you look at daycare. Daycare is extremely expensive. Mm-hmm. And if I know that, for example, if I start making this amount of money and I'm going to lose my daycare subsidy, I'm going to have a choice on what it is that I'm going to need to be able to do. But that may stop me from pursuing a job that then may allow me to be able to move up the ladder within that company or organization, or to get that extra training to move up. So we are going to have to understand that when we are making an investment in things like daycare or subsidizing a person that is working to ensure that they keep working, to make sure that they are at a level where they are not in poverty because they're getting skills to move up that economic ladder, that we are supporting those types of things. And that is a different way of thinking. And we have to do that. So be it daycare or subsidizing training to make sure that people are working in an environment where they can go from a CNA to a licensed practical nurse, or they can go from an apprentice to then being that electrical worker, or they can go from being a teaching assistant to a teacher. But they will need supports while they're doing that. And then in the long run, it may cost us some money to do those things, but long term, it's gonna cost us less, because those people will not be on the system, and then they won't be in poverty, and then they're going to be contributing to our economy in a way that will help us all. They'll be paying sales tax, they'll be paying property tax, they'll be paying federal tax, state tax. So that's the way we need to think about it. And I think that by doing that, we'll start to see a dent in the poverty rate. The other thing that we have to do is we have to say to our young people from a very early age that because you may be born in poverty, that doesn't mean that you have to stay there. That we say to our young people that education is the passport to the future, and the future belongs to those who have it. That we make sure that our young people have access to education very early on. That we look at the entry points of our young people, pre-K, 3rd grade, 9th grade, that we're making sure that they are doing well at those different entry points, because they're more likely to be successful and not end up in poverty. Because then they'll be on a pathway to either a job or a trade or a career. So this is a holistic view that we have to take. And we can't look for quick fixes. We can't look for simple answers. It's something that is complex, but it's something that we can accomplish if we do it in a collaborative fashion with all levels of government. And I'll end this by saying that, because this is something I'm very passionate about, is that when you look at FEMA, when FEMA comes in for a natural disaster, they take a whole of a community approach. And what does that mean? That means that the church might have some cots there because there's flooding. That means that the county, state, and local governments are working together because you might have this terrible flood. The business are providing food and locations for people to be because you might have this tremendous flood. So when you look at poverty and a lot of the things that we face in our community, gun violence, poverty, you can use any one of the challenges that we have in our community. It will require a whole of community approach where egos and turf is checked at the door and people are willing to work in a collaborative fashion, not because it's the good thing to do when the cameras are rolling, but more importantly, it needs to be done when the cameras aren't rolling, and it will come in results of, it will manifest itself in those poverty rates being down. So obviously, what we have tried over the years, some of it's worked, some of it hasn't. But without a whole of community approach, we won't see a dent in the poverty numbers. And it's easier said than done. I have no illusions there, but it has to take a start, and the mayor has to take the lead on it, along with our other leaders in the community.
And you spoke of education, and you're certainly no stranger to the school district. You were the youngest person ever to be elected. You served for a decade on the school board. You were president for 5 years. And yet, I mean, while graduation rates have improved, the city school district still lags in the state and with other districts around the country. As mayor, are there things you can do that you weren't able to do when you were on the school board?
So the other day, my kids were joking with me. They said, "Daddy, you have something in your hair." And I said, "That's not something in my hair, that's gray hair." And that gray hair was from my time on the school board. So it is, and I'm sure I'll have some from the city as well, but it is an absolutely challenging thing. I will tell you that what I will do as mayor is to say, what are the 2 to 3 things that the city can do to support the school district? For example, we know, as I mentioned earlier, that there are, for example, entry points that are extremely important as it relates to education. We know that if a young person is involved in pre-K, which is something I pushed for, it was cutting edge at the time when we pushed for expansion of pre-K when I was on the school board. We know that that young person has a greater chance of graduating. They have a greater chance of being successful in life. So can the city support pre-K in some way to be able to do that? We know that if a person is reading on grade level by 3rd grade, they're more likely to graduate. We also know that if a person is not reading on grade level by 3rd grade, the chances of them having success in life is severely diminished, and most likely they will not graduate and they will not be a successful adult, which is kind of scary when you think about it, because 3rd grade is pretty young. I mean, you're probably 8 or 9 when you're in 3rd grade. Yeah. And then we know at high school, if you're in 9th grade and you have at least 1 Regents exam and at least 5 credits, the chances of you graduating increase. So our question is, and my question will be, what can we do as a city to either affect those types of things? And I think that there are things that happen outside of school that affect what happens in school. So what can we do in our recreation centers that have pretty good distribution around the city? How can we use those as education hubs? How can we collaborate with the school district and other places to address some of the things that I talked about in a holistic way? We know that young people that are more involved in activities, after school activities and summer jobs and other types of activities at a young age, they're more likely to be successful in school, more likely to be successful in arts. What can we do as a city to help support arts when kids are outside of the school as a carrot or an incentive to be able to help their education? Are there things that we can do to make sure that both parent and child are being educated simultaneously? So at the same time, when you're doing something on a Saturday to bring that child up to grade level to grade 3, can you also have their parent there in another room working to get their GED? So we have to look at the things that we can control. I believe in controlling the controllables. The mayor, while the mayor does not control the schools, the mayor can influence the schools. And what I want to do is to be a force for good, a helpful force, and be able to point out 2 to 3 to 4 things that we can do. I will have an internal team in City Hall that will be focused on education. Education will be something that they will look at. We will understand that we can't control it, but we will do everything that we can to make sure that we support the district, to make sure that they are successful. And that's important because long-term, the city's success is tied to how the schools are. And we want to make sure that our schools are as successful as possible. I also hope that there will be, maybe a regional academy that will draw from other places that could also help the school district. I think that that's a concept that they should fully embrace and work with around different topics. Maybe it's technology or green technology. I think that those things are things that will also get parents excited. So those are, I think some of the things that we can do to support education. But I will point out, and I'll end here. The city does not control the schools, and I think it's important for people to understand that. But we can influence schools for sure.
Mm-hmm. I would like to get your thoughts on the Race Commission report. In that, if you think, the main takeaway there was that structural racism exists and persists because of policies and practices that do not work for the benefit of people of color. Are there policies and practices in city government that need to be changed to address this issue?
Well, I think every government has, not just city government, but also business and industry. We all need to be conscious about the past, so that way we won't repeat it in the future. I always say, listen, we have a past to remember, a present to live, and a future to build. So in the past, there have been lots of structural inequity in many organizations. Mm-hmm. And the city of Rochester is no different. So I think we have to be honest about those things. How do we make sure that we recruit and retain talent that is diverse, and that these individuals have the opportunity for a career ladder to advance within the organization? I think that it's important to look at that. How do we make sure that we are paying people a living wage, to make sure that if we are advocating in city government for individuals to be a part of the middle class, that we are paying middle class wages to get people there? I think that is extremely important. And how do we ensure that people are taking advantage of positions that are in city government that everyone should have access to? I think that is important to look at. And if they have not been able to, why not? So I think that all government has to look at that. I think that the role of government is to address challenges that have happened before, but more importantly, to ensure that going forward that we learn from them, so that way we won't repeat them. I think the RAISE report is something that will be on my desk, because I've been around for a long time and I've seen a lot of reports. That report has some pretty clear recommendations that I think that city government and county government can do. But in order for that report to really come off the page and become successful, the county and city have to be joined in that effort. And I can tell you that I've committed myself to the county executive to be a force to work together to help advance those things. But also, I think that that report also talks about some things that the larger community and the private sector and the not-for-profit sector has to do. And I think that those also have to be part of the conversation as we look at making that Race Commission report become a reality. It's very important that just not be a report that just sits on somebody's desk, but that it gets the attention that it needs going forward. I hope that there will be regular quarterly updates on this report and where they are. And if we are moving forward, talk about it. And if we're not, say why not, and take it from there. But I think it's something that it has to be a living, breathing document in order for it to be successful.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at, I'm sure you have, being on city council, the plan that Mayor Warren submitted for the 202 million coming from the Federal American Rescue Plan Act. What's your take on her plan? Are there any changes you would want? She's sort of pitched it as a historic opportunity to shape Rochester's recovery. Do you see it that way? And do you have any thoughts on that plan?
Well, I think first off that those funds need to be expended by 2026. You have until 2024 to say where those funds are going to go. I can tell you that my team will be having a lot more extensive conversations about how we plan on using American Rescue dollars. I mean, I think that it's important to remember that we only have about 2 months left in this year. It's October now, November, December. So there's a lot of conversations that will need to take place more in person with the community members, broader based conversations with City Council as it relates to American Rescue dollars and how those funds should be spent. I think that one of the things that is absolutely critical to me is that those dollars be leveraged by working cooperatively with the county, who is also getting a similar allocation, as well as the school district. Because if there are joint projects, for example, that we can work on to make sure that we have those dollars go a longer way, we should be doing that. So yeah, I look forward in my administration, I can tell you, having a lot more robust conversations about American Rescue dollars. I think that there's been some great ideas that have been put forth. I think that all of those ideas will have to be evaluated one by one. There are many different puzzle pieces. How do those puzzle pieces fit into my overall agenda that we've advanced? I think there's some great things that have been proposed, but I can tell you that I look forward to much more dialogue on where those American Rescue dollars should go and should be funded. The county has just started their conversation. They have an event next week. It's either this week or next week at Seneca Park Zoo, where they're having community folks come and talk about how they would like to see the county's ARPA funds spent. But the historic opportunity that we have is that we have 3 mammoth institutions: the school district, the county, and the city getting these funds. And one of the things that I've said to people is that we need to see how we can collectively address the challenges that we have in our community, be it the Race Commission report, which outlines some of those things that are outlined in the city's 2034 plan, things that the Rochester Monroe County Anti-Poverty Initiative has talked about over the years, and many other reports. So how do we collectively use those resources to help solve the pressing challenges that we have is something that is a #1 priority for me.
Just looking at time, I'm going to ask you a lighter question. Who has influenced your thinking on politics and governing? Who influences you, and who do you look up to?
Well, I mean, I look up to a lot of folks. I mean, one of the people I looked up to a lot growing up. I've read about him. I studied political science in school. I'm a student of history. I love history. I've read history books. Is Maynard Jackson, who was mayor of Atlanta. You may remember he's one of the first African-American mayors of Atlanta. But Maynard Jackson wasn't just a bump on the log. He was a guy who was transformative as mayor. He, particularly as it related to economic development, he really brought hope to Atlanta at a time where Atlanta was just getting out of segregation. And you still see the dividends being paid there. So for example, when he built that airport, he made sure that citizens in the city of Atlanta participated in that. And that brought in a renaissance in Atlanta, particularly for marginalized communities and people who usually would not have had the opportunity to participate in business, to start thinking through an economic development lens. So Maynard Jackson is somebody who is an absolute influence. I will tell you, Bill Johnson. I interned with Bill Johnson when I was in high school and in college in his office. He had a mayor's youth summit that he had when I was a kid. I was on his youth. He had a youth advisory council that I was on for his belief in community building. So he brought many different people in the community together. Back then it was called Neighbors Building Neighbors. It really empowered neighborhoods and neighbors and regular everyday citizens to get involved. So he also has been a longtime influence for many years. I mean, he's known me since I was a child. So locally, he's someone that has influenced me. And then a distant relative of ours, William Levi Dawson, who was one of the first African Americans elected to Congress at a time during segregated times. He was a very understated individual. He didn't brag or do any of those things, but he was about getting things done. And he got a lot done for Chicago back then. A lot of folks have never heard the name, but he was not limelight. He wasn't a show horse. He was a workhorse. And that is my mantra. My team knows that I'm not big on talking about what you want to do, because I think you have to show people. And I think that Dawson, that was kind of like his mantra. He was involved in a lot of civil rights discussions, but he was never on the news, but he was never front and center. He was kind of like behind the scenes during that civil rights time as an elected official, pushing for a lot of the changes that he wanted to see during the civil rights in the 50s and 60s. And he started out in the 40s. So those are three individuals that that have had a very, very large impact on my thinking as it relates to politics.
My final question for today: in 2034, Rochester will celebrate its 200th birthday. If you achieve your vision for the city, how different will Rochester look from today?
I think that you would see a marked difference in the poverty rate. That the poverty rate will be decreased. That citizens will feel more engaged than they ever did before, and that every neighborhood would feel connected to something bigger, something larger than themselves. That they would see themselves as part of the city and not just some isolated place, and the city is just somewhere. That our downtown would be vibrant. That downtown would not just be a place where people go to work, but it will be a permanent destination where people will want to come all the time. And it will be a place like in other cities where the tapestry of this great city will be represented on a regular basis. That we have a stronger education system, and that in 2034 that we'll be able to say, we may not be where we want to, we may not be where we want to be, but thank God we're not where we were. And that people would feel that way, that they would feel that we have come further than we were, and that we will have something to show for it. If we are able to feel that way in 2034, I think that will be a success. We'll still have a lot more work to do because nothing happens overnight, but we will have something to celebrate.
Well, thank you, Malik, for being with us today. I know you're a very busy person, so we really appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you to our sponsors, Bond, Shenick and King, LLP, and Canandaigua National Bank. I'm going to turn it over to Karen Hyder, who produced this event. Thank you, Karen.
It's so nice to be with you. Thank you so much, Mr. Evans. Thank you, Smriti. And thank you all for joining this session. I hope you'll join us for our next virtual event scheduled for December 7th at noon Eastern Time. We'll be talking about the future of food. Also, please sign up for the free Beacon Weekly Review at rochesterbeacon.com. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much for joining us.